I'm AJ with Robertson Heating Supply. Today, we're gonna go over a basic gas system and a system in a home. So we're gonna cover anywhere from ductwork to the HVAC side of it, which we're gonna talk about the cooling coil, the gas furnace, the gas pipe, exhaust, and also the air filtration system. And then later on, we'll dive into components inside a gas furnace and all how it works together. So we'll get started. This over here is called the return duct. The reason it's called the return duct is because it is pulling all the air back from the house, which will then go through the filtration system into the furnace blower wheel, which then is going to pass it over the heat exchanger, which will either A, heat it up, or we pass it over the evaporator coil, which will then cool that air down. It then goes into the supply plenum, which branches out to the trunk of the duct, and then that will supply the heated or cooled air to the rest of the house. Okay? The return duct is super important to make sure it's sized right. If we size it too small, we starve the furnace for air, and then we can run into any kind of error codes or furnaces malfunctioning and really shorten the life of a gas furnace or any kind of appliance like this. So it's super important we properly size this return air ductwork with that filter to make sure we have adequate enough air coming back to the furnace. On the same side, in the supply plenum, it's right here is called a filter. The filter traps any kind of particles coming through the air, like dust and spores and things like that. This here is actually a media filter. It's about 4 inches wide, and filters comes in very many different shapes and sizes. The basic filters that we find in an HVAC system are 1 inch wide, and they could be media filters as well, or they could be just a normal fiberglass or horsehair kind of filter. This one here is about 4 inches, and it creates more surface area for air to go through, and we have more area for particles to be trapped. At the same time, it lets more air through it. We'll get into filters later on and properly sizing filters as well. Here is the gas line. The gas line always has a safety gas shutoff on it. This here is a basic 1/2 inch gas ball cock. Comes down through black iron pipe, which then enters the furnace, and it delivers the gas to be ignited and burned to create the heat for the house. Now, what do we do with that gas and that flame and all the particles of combustion? We send that out the chimney. So here is actually the exhaust pipe. This is a 96% efficient gas furnace. So the reason it's vented in a PVC plastic pipe is because it actually condenses and it's a lower temperature. So the temperature of a typical 95% or 96% gas furnace is probably somewhere around the 105 to 110 degree range. When we get down to those cool exhaust temperatures, they start to condense. That's why we have to have it in a plastic PVC pipe. The condensed portion of that exhaust will create water particles, and it'll go down in, and we're actually going to drain that out of the furnace on this side. Now, where do we get the air to burn? We bring it in from the outside on this furnace. This furnace has an intake air pipe that again is PVC pipe. Comes down in and delivers the air from outside to be burned, sent through the heat exchanger, and then out the exhaust. Some furnaces will actually not have this hooked up, and it'll just use the air from inside the house. We've done that for plenty of years. It's been around for a long time like that. It just depends on the application of where we want to take that intake air from, whether it be the house, if we have enough and adequate, or if we want to take it in from the outside. This here is called the line set. This blue piece here is called a filter dryer. Refrigerant travels through this copper line set and delivers it to what we call this evaporator coil up top here. So this does all the air conditioning side of the business. This black Insulated pipe here is actually cold. The reason it's insulated is because it sweats. So we insulate it to keep it from sweating and dripping all over the basement or the equipment. This other pipe here is a little bit warmer than this one, so it's not necessarily insulated all the time, only certain applications. The filter dryer collects any kind of moisture or particles inside that refrigerant system. We don't want any kind of moisture in with the refrigerant because it will not work properly if it is. We have to be able to drain an air conditioner. So on this side we have condensate coming out of the evaporator coil, because as we cool the air down, we actually take humidity out of the air and it begins to condensate. Much like a glass of ice water sitting outside in the middle of summer. You get condensate on the outside of that glass. We're doing the same exact thing going on here inside this evaporator coil. We need to get rid of that condensate. So we drain it out the corner here and it'll go down to a drain in the basement. Now, the evaporator coil, its main purpose inside an air conditioning system is as the return air comes back across, which is probably about 70 degrees, it comes over evaporator coil, and this evaporator coil is in the range of anywhere from 40 to 45 degrees. So the 70 degree return air touching that 45 degree evaporator coil is going to cool the air down and warm the refrigerant up because it's extracting heat out of the air. After the air passes through the evaporator coil, it is then cooled down inside the plenum up here and then distributed throughout the building. The electrical side of this, we're bringing 110 volt electric down the furnace and into the control box or into a switch for safety. And then we also use thermostat wire, which comes down. Thermostat wire is typically 18 gauge. It could be anywhere from 2 conductor or 5 or 8 conductor, depending on the application that you have. We'll break into the filter here in a minute, and same with the gas furnace. The filter is very, very important in a system to keep any kind of dust particles or any other large particles from coming across the furnace blower and being stuck into the coil and even distributed out to the air that you're breathing. This media filter here is a 20 by 25. It is the proper size for this application. You're going to find some media filters are 16 by 25, 20 by 25, or even 20 by 20 are very popular sizes for these types of filters. When you get to 1-inch filters, they're just smaller than this. However, 1-inch media filters, they capture a lot of particles, but they also capture a lot of air. So we don't really ever suggest 1-inch filters or media filters for applications like this. If you're going to go to a media filter, we definitely suggest upgrading to this type of larger media filter. Alright, now we're going to open up the gas furnace and check out the components inside. So we remove the door, and inside this high efficiency gas furnace we have a lot of wires going on in here and a lot of components that make sure either safety of operation, safety of the consumer, and also to make sure the unit is working properly. Right here, this right here is actually called a gas valve. Its job is to let gas come from this gas pipe into this manifold right here. The manifold then has orifices inside it that spit the gas out into these burners here and shoots it into the heat exchanger. I'll show you heat exchanger a little bit later on. When the gas comes out of the orifices and through the burners, we have an igniter over here. It can either be a hot surface igniter, which glows very hot and red, or it could be a direct spark igniter, which sparks kind of like a gas stove or a gas grill. So it lights the gas, and the gas then shoots a flame into the heat exchanger, warms up the heat exchanger, And then as air passes over that heat exchanger, it warms the air and sends it into the rest of the house. Heat exchangers separate any of the particles of combustion or any of the combustion process. So any of the dangerous carbon monoxide gases and everything else, it separates it from the house air. So that way they never touch. Keeping the homeowner safe and making sure we're not putting carbon dioxide into the house. The heat exchanger is a very important part of the process. We then take all that gas and heat and we pull it through a collector box down here and into this draft inducer motor. So the draft inducer motor's job is to actually pull all that gas and flame out from here, and it takes the gas out the chimney or out the exhaust pipe here. On here for that draft inducer, we have 2 pressure switches. The pressure switch's job is to make sure that our flue pipe is unobstructed and our heat exchanger is okay as well. That is the sole job of these little pressure switches here. They actually have a silicone hose that comes and connects into this draft inducer. Over here we have a flame sensor. The flame sensor's job is to actually make sure that we have lit the gas and we have a flame. So we light the gas on this side, it then carries across the burners and proves flame or ignition on this side to make sure every burner lit. The flame sensor runs down into the control board, and then through a process of digital, it could be a digital signal, it can be through microamps, it's actually reading back into the control board telling it we have a flame, we're safe, we're good to go. We also have some safeties inside the furnace that are in these red wires here, and they are protecting the furnace from overheating. They're called limits. Limits, we have one looking at the main airflow to make sure it's not too hot. Maybe our blower motor goes bad and we're not passing air over it. Well, it gets too hot, and then at that point it'll shut off the furnace and keep it off for an extended period of time. Or up here, we actually have rollouts. These rollouts make sure that the flame is shooting properly into the heat exchanger. Should they be rolling back or getting too hot around here, they actually kick and open up and then shut the furnace down permanently. These rollouts are manual resets, so a qualified technician should come out and reset it, but knowing there is something more wrong if one of those set. We also have a condensate drain on this furnace down here. So we talked about how we have condensate coming out of the exhaust and we need to drain it out properly. This is what the trap is for. So the condensate trap holds a little bit of condensate in it, which then takes it out the pipe and out this side into our PVC pipe on that side of the furnace. That's pretty much what's happening up here in the gas furnace. Now, as we take the bottom door off, we're gonna find our control board, and this is all going to be in our blower section of our furnace. Right here we actually have a safety switch, so when I take the door off, it shuts off the electric to the furnace down here for safety reasons. This is a control board down here where we see our thermostat wire comes down into. This is thermostat wire, 18 gauge, again like we talked about, and this has actually 5 wires in it, so it's a 5 conductor. The wires are color coded to help with ease of application and installation, so we know what wire is connected to what terminal in the board and at the thermostat. Now the thermostat's job up in the house is actually send power down these wires to the control board and tell it what it wants to happen, whether it wants heating or whether it wants cooling or maybe just wants the fan to run. That's the only job of the thermostat, is to ensure and tell this unit what to do. We also have a transformer here. It takes 110 volts or 230 volts depending on your application, and takes that voltage down to a safe low voltage for all our control stuff. The blower motor and assembly section in here, it rotates a wheel inside there, which then sucks air from the return and pushes it up across the heat exchanger and out. That's all done down here in this application. So we also have other field installed accessories that can be purchased separately from the furnace, much like the air cleaner. We have like UV lights or ionization products. So we'll get back to the shop and we'll actually tear this apart and break it down a little further.